All right, so final part of chapter 14, Age of Democratic Revolution, and it's going to be part 4, and this is the rise of nationalism. So one of the guys that were important during this time was William Wilberforce. He's an English reformer and a devout Christian. He was horrified by the plight of slaves, the life of slaves. He led the fight to abolish slavery in England, and in 1807 he persuaded Parliament to pass the Slave Trade Bill, which banned the slave trade. In other words, you couldn't buy and sell slaves anymore. Later, Wilberforce achieved the abolition completely of slavery itself throughout all the British Empire in 1833. All right, so the spirit of nationalism. Nationalism is a belief that each nationality or each ethnic group, each race, is entitled to his own government and national homeland. So each race, each ethnicity should have its own country. The French Revolution ignited a spirit of nationalism in Europe by teaching that each government should be based on the will of the people. So Napoleon's conquest also inspired nationalist resentment against France. So many people hated the French. They kind of all banded together from their country and became nationalists. So the Congress of Vienna failed to take into account the desire of many people to control their own governments. Instead, they favored maintaining traditional rulers like kings and queens. So as a result, many European peoples were still not united, and others lived under foreign rule. All right, so the Metternich era. So Prince Clemens von Metternich of Austria, the leading statesman of the Congress of Vienna, is kind of in charge of the whole thing. He established a system that prevented attempts at nationalism or political change in Europe. So he didn't want anything to change again, like during the French Revolution or during the time of Napoleon. He wanted everything to go back to kings and queens of each country. The 30 years following the Congress of Vienna witnessed a series of unsuccessful revolutions in Italy, Germany, and Poland. In these countries, national groups sought to achieve their independence but were defeated by the armies of Austria and Russia. So Metternich's going to get the armies of Austria and Russia together to pretty much put down any revolt in any of these countries in Europe. So two countries were different, Greece and Belgium. Both did achieve their independence in 1830. France overthrew the restored monarchy and established a new constitutional monarchy in the same year. So the revolutions of 1848 is kind of the year of revolutions. So the year 1848 is considered one of the turning points in the 19th century. In 1848, the constitutional monarchy of France was overthrown, and the new French Republic was created. This caused a new wave of revolutions in Italy, Germany, Austria, and Hungary. So German liberals also offered the crown of a united Germany to the King of Prussia, but he refused their offer. By 1849, the tide began to turn, and the Austrian army, so going back to Metternich, and with Russian support, proved too powerful for these revolutionaries, and a lot of these revolutions were stopped. So each revolutionary regime collapsed, except in France, where Napoleon's nephew now took power and proclaimed himself Napoleon III. All right, so Latin America, the independence of Latin America. So one of the most far-reaching effects of the American and French Revolution was they led to the independence of Latin America. So Latin America kind of followed along those lines of the American French Revolution. What had happened is the abuse of the colonial system. The Spanish and the Portuguese colonial system caused increasing unrest in Latin America, right, because they pretty much used everybody in Latin America as slave labor. So Creoles were the descendants of Europeans. They had been denied political power and resented European-born peninsulares. So if you look over here at the triangle, you have the peninsulares at the top. Right below them is Creoles. The difference between a peninsulares and a Creole is peninsulares is born on the peninsula of Spain, so they're born in Spain. The Creoles are going to be born in the colonies in the Americas, in Latin America. So, but they're still both complete Spanish blood. So mom and dad were both from Spain. So the colonists also resented Spanish economic restrictions that made it difficult for them to trade directly with other countries other than Spain or to manufacture their own goods. So what Spain did is they didn't allow the Latin American colonists to trade with Britain. And at that time, Britain had the cheapest clothes and a lot of stuff that was cheaper than Spain, but Spain would force them to buy their more expensive stuff. So revolutionary ideas spread into Latin America. So the American and French revolutions spread revolutionary ideas in Latin America. These revolutions taught that people should be entitled to a government that protected their interests. So during the Napoleonic Wars in Europe, the colonists actually got to govern themselves. Europe was too busy fighting Napoleon, so the Latin American colonists actually got to govern themselves. So when Napoleon was defeated in 1814, the King of Spain was brought back to the throne of Spain, and he reimposed all the old colonial system, prohibiting the colonists again from trading directly with Britain or other countries except for Spain. Latin American leaders refused to return to the Spanish rule and demanded independence. And eventually Brazil declares its independence from Portugal in 1823. So by 1824, Latin America independence was firmly established. So by 1824, most of these countries were breaking away from Spain or from Portugal. So some of the different leaders at the time, Toussaint Louverture, okay, he led an African slave uprising in 1791, forcing the French out of Haiti. So that made Haiti the first Latin American colony to achieve independence. Jose de San Martin worked to liberate Argentina and Chile from Spain, and he ruled in the years 1816 to 1818. And then the big one, Bolivar, defeated the Spanish forces between 1819 and 1825. He liberated Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia. And then in Mexico, you have Miguel Hidalgo, a priest, began the rebellion against the Spanish rule in Mexico in 1810. The uprising failed, but Mexico later achieved its independence in 1821. So, Simón Bolivar and the struggle for independence. Bolivar was born in Venezuela, so he's a Creole. He's of Spanish blood, complete full-blood Spanish, but he's born in the Americas. And he became known as the Liberator. So a Creole aristocrat, he emerged as the most important leader in the struggle for the independence of South America from Spain. So Bolivar left a legacy of military control over political affairs in South America. So he was a military general. He ruled that area, and that's kind of what Latin America had for a long time after he was gone. So in 1813, Bolivar led the fight for independence of Venezuela. And in 1815, Bolivar was forced to flee South America. He goes to Jamaica. He appealed to the English to come and help him. And eventually he does get help from Haiti, who was already independent. So they gave him support in exchange for his promise to abolish slavery. So in 1817, he returned to South America with the Haitian support, recaptures New Granada, which is kind of the area that he's from. And he used this area as a base to liberate Venezuela and Ecuador. So in 1819, Bolivar joined Ecuador, Venezuela, and Colombia all into one country, and it was called Gran Colombia. He was the first president. He set out to unite all of South America. He wanted to make South America into the United States. Bolivar joined with Argentine leader Jose San Martin and sought the liberation of Peru. And in 1824, Bolivar successfully defeated the Spanish forces. And this is when the United States comes up with the Monroe Doctrine issued by the United States in 1823. It also helped to protect the new independent countries of South America by warning any European powers against further intervention. So Europeans couldn't come back into Latin America, or they would have to face consequences from the United States. So Bolivar's dream was to create a democratic South America federation like the United States. However, he declared himself dictator, just as Napoleon had done in France. So in summary, during the American Revolution, the American colonists fought for their independence from Great Britain. Traditions of English political liberty, such as the legacy of the Glorious Revolution, William and Mary, and the ideas of John Locke and other Enlightenment writers influenced their thinking. The Declaration of Independence reflected many of these Enlightenment ideas. So in the U.S. Constitution, Americans adopted the ideas of Montesquieu to create a new Republican government where you voted for representatives and they went and represented you. And it was based on the separation of powers between the branches of government. So you have a system of checks and balances, the three different parts of the government. The social divisions, Enlightenment ideas, and severe financial crisis is what triggered the French Revolution. So when the king asked the nobles to give up their tax exemptions, they demanded a meeting of the Estates General, and that all didn't work out very good. All right, so once the Estates General met, the deputies of the Third Estate declared themselves the National Assembly. So they declared themselves the government, and they stormed the Bastille, which is the prison, and this prevented the king, because they got weapons at the Bastille, and this prevented the king from using force against him. So the National Assembly abolished hereditary privileges of the nobles. Okay, they wrote the Declaration of Rights of Man, and they wrote a new constitution, turning France into a constitutional monarchy at first. Eventually, Louis XVI refuses to cooperate. He's overthrown and executed. So France was soon at war with Europe. French leaders introduced mass conscription, which meant they forced every male pretty much to be in the army. They had the Reign of Terror, and later radical leaders themselves were executed after the Reign of Terror. So then we have Napoleon Bonaparte defeated France's enemies and seized power in 1799. Later, he crowned himself emperor. Napoleon spread the achievements of the French Revolution throughout Europe, but he also created a huge anti-French feelings that stirred new nationalism feelings in these different countries where he had conquered them. So Napoleon was defeated after his failed invasion of Russia, and the Allies restored Louis XVIII and other rulers. At the Congress of Vienna, the Allied leaders withdrew the borders of Europe to achieve a legitimacy and a balance of powers. So they didn't want any one country to become too powerful, like France. So during the period from 1815 to 1848, European leaders like Metternich crushed rebellions and stifled the rising nationalist spirit in Europe. The American and French revolutions influenced Latin America. Leaders like Simon Bolivar led the fight for independence from Spain. And these I'll send you on these are some of the terms. I'll send you those in the Quizlet. So test is coming up.